All right, folks, welcome back to the latest installment of our League podcast series. For this one, we're going to be talking about the civilization that we've been discussing a ton in story this month, Shurima, of course. We've seen all kinds of stuff coming out between a new champion release, leading on to some updated bios, and then, of course, a short story that just dropped. So my name is Dylan Most Dirty, member of the NA Player Relations team, going all over Riot, trying to find you interesting devs, writers, artists, that kind of thing to talk to. And, of course, we've got the folks behind Shurima with us here today. So you may recognize Ant Reynolds, I believe Ant Linnae now, actually, and Graham McNeil, who we've had before on this discussing Targon a couple months ago. Check that one out if you want to hear more about him. Also happy to welcome Rayla Haid, a writer behind Shurima as well.
Hi, I'm Rayla. I go by Gelbug on Summoner's Rift, and I love to play mid. One of my favorite champions is Ziggs. I like to throw all the bombs. And I'm excited to be here talking to you guys. Cool.
Awesome. So Ant and Graham, as I'd mentioned, we'd spoken previously about kind of where story was going. And I think at that time you guys obviously knew was coming up, even if I and the players didn't. Interested to kind of dive into that. Like, what did you guys learn since the last story beat? How did it apply to this? Why Shurima? All that kind of stuff. So what was the genesis? We roll out of Targon and then we're headed towards Shurima. Why?
Well, Shurima was an event that happened quite a while back, and we'd set a lot of the pieces in motion, but we hadn't paid a lot of it off. So this was a good time to go back into Shurima and actually start moving some of those pieces forward and pay off some of the story beats that we'd set up earlier on. And it'd been a while since we'd seen a lot of love for Shurima, so this, on a lot of levels, it seemed like a good chance to go back. And what with Talia coming out, this seemed like a great opportunity for us to support that with extra Shurima content and move some of that story forward with Bloodline.
Interesting. So I know that, obviously you put a point on something that I think some players were definitely asking about, which is, wait, Shurima again? Does this mean the old Shurima stuff didn't apply? And I guess the way I thought about it was that, you know, that first Shurima event was maybe call it like, you know, some of the first of the kind of new wave of the approach we're taking to story, and we got a lot of things right, but there's also still a ton we've learned in the meantime. Is that why we felt it was important to revisit it rather than exploring, you know, a lot of the other unexplored stuff out there?
I mean, there's a lot to explore everywhere, and this was it was kind of opportunistic just because we had Talia coming out, and we wanted to see what happened next. Like we talked so much about, like we saw in that event, Azir returning and Shurima returning, arising, but we hadn't seen what that means for the world. So you go, that was a couple of years ago. So you go, even in Runeterra, we wanted to move that timeline along a little bit. So I think it was just a good time to do this, I think.
Yeah, honestly, I think that's one of my favorite part about Bloodlines is I was just like, oh, wow, like things have actually moved at this point. Zera's blown up a freaking city. So I know the lore nerd in me was excited to see that. So in terms of putting this event together, I think the interesting thing immediately is that this, I believe, is our first solely story event that we've had.
Shadow and Fortune was really just a story.
Oh, really?
Yeah. But every one that we've done has been a little bit different. So,
sure,
like with Bilgewater had like a lot going all around it. So we had the game mode, you had different skins, you had all sorts of different things around that.
Oh, I guess that's what I was getting at. Shadow and Fortune was still kind of proximate to that, right?
Well, kinda.
Okay.
It was sort of moving that story along as well. So like there was no actual game mode or anything around that, but it was like taking that same story. Like it was basically saying, like, what now that Gangplank's not there in Bilgewater running it, what happens when the Harrowing rolls in? So it was, that was really just we wanted to see what happened next, and it was just at a good time of the year when people wanted to see some spooky kind of stuff. So that's when we did the Shadow Isles new bios. But that was really just what we all wanted to see what happens next. And it was very similar with Shurima.
Yeah, as much as the players, we want to see what happens next. We've got all these ideas and great forward plans for how to tell the kind of stories we'd like to see. And these events are a great opportunity for us to do that because we want to see it as much as the players do.
Yeah, I guess that's a good point. I mean, I've seen this enough with champions where we're not going to force an idea out just because we think like it needs to get done or there's a need or we've said we're going to do it. Like it's pretty core here that we want to make sure that we're passionate about the things we're working on, the next beat in the story. Otherwise, it's not going to be as good. And so I definitely get that, where you guys were looking at Shurima and saying, man, there's definitely some more stuff to do here. So how did it start to take shape? Was it like, oh, we'll do a short story? Was Talia kind of the genesis of it? Oh, we'll time it around that? Or were a bunch of new bios just coming out?
Well, we had lots of ideas around these different champions and their stories going forward. So a lot of those the stories had kind of been beaten out several years ago during the Shurima event. So not just us, it was the whole narrative team. So you had lots of different people involved in working out what these characters' stories could be, like their longer arcs.
Gotcha.
But we had never paid any of those off. So it was really Talia, I think, that sort of galvanized it. It was, we had the Shurima champ coming out, and it was like, it made us just think, well, we haven't seen Shurima for a little while. What's changed since last time we saw it? Because that kind of plays into her story as well. So it was really that was it really. It was just like, well, we've got these stories that we wanted to explore a little bit further, move this timeline along a little bit. You got this champ coming out. It was really like, hey, this is a great opportunity to go back and give some love to some of those Shuriman champions in terms of longer bios and stories that just hadn't seen that for a while.
Sure, that makes sense. I imagine you folks are privy to a ton of essentially just kind of early dev and foundational building that nobody else knows about, because it's nascent, it's even foggy and fuzzy in some ways. And specifically with Shurima, yeah, I imagine for that first one there was essentially stuff left on the cutting room floor that you, not because it wasn't good or anything, but because it kind of didn't make it in time, or it wasn't appropriate for the setting. And you're right now that it's cool we get to do that payoff. So let's dive into the parts you each individually played in this. So Rayla, as the newcomer, let's do you first. What were you involved in?
So I wrote the bios for Sivir, Skarner, Amumu, and Rammus.
Got you.
And I also wrote the color text for Skarner and Rammus.
Got you. And just so the listeners know, and again, stuff's kind of constantly been changing here, color text is essentially the first part of those champ bio pages?
Color text is actually the second part. So the first part of the bio is the backstory, where we hear about how the champion came to be who they are, essentially their origin story. And then the color text is a little scene or a longer scene that kind of shows the champion being who they are.
Got you. And so we've done a lot of different versions of telling stories about our champions at this point. So many versions. This seems like it's a pretty kind of standardized new approach. Obviously, we applied it in all of the new cases with the Shurima event. I imagine that's intended to be something of a standard going forward.
Yeah, I mean, we've come to a point where we really properly understand a good way of how to best represent a champ on the website to the players, and to get across the essential pillars of who they are. Mm-hmm. And like Rayla says, the color text is designed to encapsulate a moment or the essence of that champion. And so each one of these stories captures a moment in time that best gets across who that champion is supposed to be.
Sure. Plus, it lets you guys write them using their abilities in the story, of course.
Exactly. Where it's appropriate.
Pantheon jumping off a mountain, that type of thing.
Yeah. And you can kind of get inside their head a little bit more than you do in the bio, which is kind of written from a third-person perspective.
Got you. Was that something we arrived at as... how did we decide that, okay, this is how we're going to do it? We're going to do this half and this half. Was that just kind of we did it once and it worked out, hey, let's keep doing it? Or is that a master plan?
I think part of it was just experience. Yeah, it's something that we'd seen at other companies, and these are the ones that we like to read. I think that's essentially it. I think it's not a hell of a lot of writing. It's not like a novel length, or it's not like a really long story or something. But this is a really good way, we felt, of understanding who these characters are, how they became what they are, and also having that little bit of cool factor of just going, okay, this character is really cool. I want to play them now. That's the goal. These short pieces should give you a good understanding of who they are and what they're all about, but also show them being awesome and show why they're a champion. Cool. And I think a lot of it is just seeing what works in the past, seeing what works elsewhere, seeing what gets us excited, and taking it from that, really.
So we segued a little bit away from this. What ant did you kind of specifically work on in the course of this? I know that you're both kind of a senior visionary on this stuff, but that you also like to keep your hand in and specifically write stories. Did any of that go on in this?
Yeah, for sure. It's always just tricky with time.
But, for sure.
We already had some of these stories already done. So we had, from a couple of years ago, I'd done the Aziz color text back then, but George Christic had done a piece for Xerath. Odin had done a piece for Sivir that actually got had never given out to players. And we had the Amumu one as well. And Ryan Vernier had also done a really cool piece for Nasus. So we had a lot of these things. Some of them had been released to players already, some of them hadn't, but it seemed like this was just a really good opportunity in time to give them out as well. Yeah.
What about yourself, Graham? Obviously, you wrote the Bloodline short story that just came out. What about the earlier beats?
Well, I did the bios for Azir and Xerath.
Okay, so you're the one
big
who
lads.
gave me the massive hate thrill that I was getting through reading those ones. I
Yes,
was
it
sitting
was.
there like giggling. Just
Then you're a very disturbed individual.
I know. I'm sorry.
yeah. I did the two big lads there, and that was a lot of fun to do, to try and give them a more involved, entwined backstory that wasn't. They didn't paint Xerath as a pantomime villain as such.
Sure.
That he had reasons for doing what he did, even if they were reprehensible reasons. That you could see the path to the place where he's at now. That, you know, in his head, he could justify everything he was doing. He was protecting Azir by hellish means, but in his head, it was for the greater good, for potentially the greater good of Shurima, for his greater good. You know.
Sure. I was reading the Azir story. I chose a very deliberate order to read these in. I was like, okay, I need to read these ones first and everything. I actually waited a little bit until more of the bios had come out, and so it let me do that. But still, I was like, okay, I got to do Azir first, and then Xerath, of course, and then Nasus, then Renekton. So with Azir, reading through it, I remember when there started being the issues with the older emperor having the children. I was like, oh, Xerath, no. I'm sure that was intended.
Yeah, very much so.
So we'll dive back into some of that. I am curious about a procedural thing, though. So obviously, I think it's clear that Anne, in your case, working on the two brothers, and then in your case, Graham, working on the the two kind of like prime figures, that was deliberate in terms of making sure that they had a consistency to them. But how else beyond that do you essentially get assigned or assign yourself to these individual characters? Is it kind of a case of multiple people take a stab and then we go with what we're excited about, or is it like, all right, Rayla, you're gonna do Rammus? How's it work?
We usually like to choose champions that we already feel some kind of connection to. So we'll usually have a list of the champions that we want to tackle, and then people will volunteer for different ones.
Yeah.
So
Who did you
for
have
me,
to kill
I
to
like
get
monsters.
Rammus? I mean, I don't believe that you didn't have to kill somebody
I
to
like
get
the
Rammus.
non-human champions, as you can tell by my list.
There's an empty chair next to her now.
Yeah.
That's all I'll say.
Looking for open head count.
It's true.
See, it's Killbug, not Gelbug.
Yeah.
Got you.
Don't be
Alter
put
ego.
off
That's
with
my
the
alter
small
ego,
stature
yeah.
and the innocent look.
So, I'm almost tempted to kind of start in diving into a little bit more of the background and see what we were going for with all these cool new stories with some of the bigger figures. But I almost kind of want to start with some of the non-human and kind of smaller figures, just to make sure we give them their time in the sun, so to speak. Oh, that was a terrible pun. That was not intended. I'm sorry. So let's do that. When we're looking at Skarner, Rammus, and Amumu in particular, they're not main characters, so to speak, or at least not yet in this kind of like main storyline that we're seeing in Shurima. But we felt that it was important to include them in this and build them up at the same time. Like, what's just kind of the overall team thinking on that? What are we going for?
Well, we didn't want to leave anybody out. Like we wanted to do Shurima as a whole.
Okay.
So we wanted to try and tackle them all. There's quite a lot of bios there. There's probably more than we tackled in one chunk previously.
Yeah.
But it still felt like a manageable amount.
Mm-hmm.
Like some of the other nations and stuff have really much bigger rosters.
Oh,
and
yeah.
to try and tackle them in one go might be a bit tricky. But
I weep for the Demacia lore event.
yeah, it's like some of those ones we might
That's
have
not
to...
a spoiler. I'm just saying
Yeah.
theoretically, folks.
We might have to split some of those ones up
Yes.
into so we don't do them all in one big chunk necessarily. But for this one, it felt like there was just the right sort of amount that we could tackle them all, and it wouldn't have felt right if we were doing Shurima and we left out someone like Rammus. So
Or Amumu, like he's so key to the desert.
yeah,
I know some players had asked about Cassiopeia, and I imagine that's just because she's actually Noxian, even though she plays a big role in the story.
that's exactly right.
Okay.
Otherwise, we start to get into a place where it's like, well, Ezreal's been to Shurima too. Should we do him? And like it still opens up the can of worms. So we go.
Sure.
We wanted to just tackle ones which are much more associated with Shurima. So and the same with Rek'Sai. We didn't do Rek'Sai in this amount, even though she's like in Shurima.
Mm-hmm.
We figured like she kind of fits more into the group of like Void kind of characters.
Gotcha.
So yeah, she doesn't speak so much to Shurima, whereas the other champions all do.
Sure. It'd probably be a lot more of what we'd seen before, which is her eating people. And I guess I see what you're saying. It didn't like more fully flesh out Shurima. It wouldn't have more fully fleshed out Shurima itself in the same way that like I still got a feeling of that with Rammus, for example.
Yeah,
even though
exactly.
he's not directly
I think
involved
all of those smaller characters, they all still give you a better picture of what Shurima is like.
They
They're
still
all
add to
different
it,
facets.
Yeah. Gotcha. With Skarner, it's an interesting one because obviously there've been things that were slowly nudging over time, and he's definitely ensconced as a Shuriman champion. But he has older roots in his earliest imaginings in League story, in a whole nother place, a whole nother paradigm and everything. What was it like translating him, finally, like fully, I guess I would say, to this setting?
It was a lot of fun for me. Skarner was probably my favorite one to write.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Mainly because he's so alien. He's so different from the human experience. Yeah. He talks in a very different way than we do. He doesn't talk. He communicates telepathically with his fellow Brackern. But I enjoyed that one because I kind of found his voice in what he calls like a dream song. So it's not like a language. It's kind of like a bunch of thoughts and images put together and emotions. And that's how he conveys his thoughts. So for me, it was fun kind of translating that into words that humans can read on a page.
I had a great time reading it. I actually have been known to play a good amount of Skarner, and then even when on chat with my friends, I love getting like in character, just being really emo Scorpion the whole time. Just, I miss my time, like while murdering people left and right.
Yeah, it's a very sad story.
It was really cool in that way though, because it was such a contrast. Like if you have in your head Skarner fighting like he was in his story. It's frenetic and there's a lot of scorpioning going on and people getting stabbed and cut in half and stuff like that, I imagine.
It's really all miscommunication.
Yeah, but in his head, he's still that
he's defending his people.
Right. Yeah.
Why are you guys so mean to us?
Exactly.
Really
and
cool
in the story, we show him trying to communicate with them initially and then having no reaction from them. So there's this sort of tragedy in that too, and that he's trying to reach out to these people that just can't hear him.
Sure. What about a Mumu? I mean, he's a character who it's been asked for so long. What the hell is he? Why is he here? All of those things. And this is kind of that latest telling of it. I mean, and the cool different thing that happened there is there's multiple versions essentially of what a Mumu is. How did you guys arrive at that execution?
Well, we kind of see a Mumu as a myth. He's kind of this creature that roams the desert, and everyone in Shurima has their own idea of who he is and who he might be. And maybe there's some people who have seen him or who tell stories about him, but he's been around so long that the stories have been diluted over time and over multiple tellings. And that's why we have these three different stories that show different versions of who he might have been.
Gotcha. What's your favorites of the three?
My favorite one was the child tyrant.
Sure.
Side one, because I have two of them at home, so
I have my own 6-month-old now. Yes.
So I could relate to that one, and them bundling him up and stuffing him in a tomb. No offense, guys.
I love you.
I love you.
Do they listen to podcasts?
Not anymore. Yeah, and one of the things that, as well with something like a Mumu is that to definitively answer a question like that robs the character of some of his mystery.
Oh, sure.
You've got this character who's completely enmeshed in bandages. You don't know what lies behind that, what the coverings of him, how he became cursed, and to give that answer is like, oh, it's this then. Good.
Yeah.
And keeping that mystery keeps players talking about them, keeps them interesting, keeps them delving into what those theories might be of who that character is. And if people are talking about a character, they're engaged in that character.
Yeah, and I guess I'm almost realizing something too that I liked with the Rammus one, and I'm realizing in the same way, is just that to an extent, in this Shurima event and lately in our story efforts, we've been making an effort obviously to show the normal people of the world, because this is a real world that isn't just a collection of champions running around all on their own in uninhabited areas, and we obviously got a ton of that in Bloodlines, but even there, like it wouldn't feel real in that way if there was an omniscient awareness of every single detail of every single champion. You're right that in some cases these are godlike figures or myths. You know, Amumu I can see being the boogeyman of mothers' tales and warnings to their children and stuff like that. And preserving that mysticism means that we've got a cooler thing in the end when you're playing him.
Yeah, I mean, I think when you use, ordinary mortals, for want of a better term, that gives the stories a lot more scope to be dangerous to the people in the world. Because if it's just champions running around, then it becomes, two superheroes fighting one another. But if there's ordinary people caught in the crossfire, then, the world it's grounded in reality. Even in a fantasy world,
Sure.
that helps to elevate what the champions are in comparison to them. So the more we see of that, the more it feels like a living, breathing world where real things happen and extraordinary things happen too.
Gotcha. I got to ask about Rammus as well. That just seems like it had to have been fun ideation. Or like, okay, how do we take okay and turn it into a story, right?
It's very tempting to just write okay and have that be it.
I love that he said like, was it instead of okay at that final moment of speaking?
That's right.
I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
You set me up and you knocked me down.
Exactly. Well, with Rammus is a lot of fun. In the color text, I got to show Rammus through the lens of someone else, this little boy who idolizes this figure as this god. And eventually it does pay off. Like Rammus does save the boy. So it was a lot of fun to see Rammus through someone else's eyes.
But was Rammus just looking for something to eat?
Yeah. Maybe.
Who knows?
Maybe.
Who knows?
Maybe.
Was he tasting that little wooden figurine, or
He definitely tasted it, yeah.
This isn't as good as bugs. I just love the tall tales too, like, and maybe they're not. Maybe they're actually things that happen, but the like armadillo rolling into a castle, blowing it up, and then rolling out.
There were
Rammus is all things
witnesses.
to all people.
At
Okay.
least three of
Was
them.
he just looking for something to eat?
Or was
No,
he just sleep rolling?
But seriously,
Sleep rolling,
or sleep rolling. Oh man, that's the real spoiler there. So getting on into this stuff is obviously fun. It's so cool to revisit these beloved characters. But in this case, there also is the cool element that we haven't really seen before of like we're revisiting a story we've been telling. And you're right, there has been real progress. And we do have to lay some of the groundwork with the Ascended Brothers and Zareth and Azir. But I really love that there's this tangible feeling of like, man, the Shuriman thing really is moving forward. So what was it like on that note? You have let's start with Nasus and Renekton. Like obviously a lot of this stuff is more familiar to us. These characters have been previously a bit fleshed out. But there again also is the now to it. So what was it like putting those guys together, Graham?
It was a lot of fun. 'Cause I mean, that's going to sound like a standard answer, but
Sure.
it totally is. I mean, when we craft what we want to do with these characters, it's all about what excites us as for them as characters. So when we get together and we sit and talk about what is it about Nasus and Renekton individually and together that we find interesting, that excites us, and where do we see these guys going in the future, and what would be the most dramatic and interesting ways to carry their story forward, and that pays back into what we want to write about them now, so that we can seed in the ideas and the concepts and things that we will need for later on when we do these things. And a lot of the ideas behind that were ones that were really exciting to us, and hopefully that means they'll be exciting to players. So, I mean, when Ant wrote them, there was a lot of that we wanted to pay into the story.
Yeah, and it was also a good opportunity to delve into their backstory a little bit, which hadn't really been fleshed out too much.
Yeah.
We kind of knew what happened to them like at the end, but we didn't really know what they were like as kids or as young people, or what they were as humans before they became ascended. So the bios were a good idea, like good way of exploring that a little bit, and that was a lot of fun to work up. I really, after doing that sort of early work, it actually kind of made me want to do some more writing about stories of them back then.
Oh, I was just about to say that was the fun thing is that it's so easy, I imagine, for something to be like, oh, long ago and blah, and then you just dive into the stuff that you feel matters, the current stuff. But like we heard about all 4 of these mainline characters as children and like heard about their lives growing up and everything, and we heard a lot about ancient Shurima. It sounds like there was some kick-ass wars going on, I had the exact same feeling of like wanting to hear more about that. And one of the characters made a reference to, oh yeah, that time we kicked the crap out of Acathia, and I was just like, tell the story.
Well, I think that's part of what bios are for as well, is
Yeah.
to like put in hooks. It's like it's not to tell you everything about a story. If that's the case, it kind of doesn't leave you any room to play. But if the bio has enough interesting sort of little hooks that are still in there, it gives you enough so it's satisfying. But there's little ideas in there and go, I wonder what that war was. Like they're great hooks that we can come back to in the future to play with. You go, actually, let's go and tell that story about what happened X.
As much as it torments me, I definitely see the positive quality to it, which is that, as you have mentioned, it seems like they pull you back too at points when you guys leave those types of notes in story. You're like,
and it also, I think, expanding the early history of some of those guys makes them more rounded characters as well. So you go, like Renekton, you go, well, he's a big bloodthirsty crocodile guy.
Yeah.
But you go, but knowing what he was previously and the love and stuff that he had for his brother and the sacrifice that he did for his brother, you go, it makes his kind of fall that much more tragic.
Yeah, there's a lot more pathos to the character now when you see everything he gave up to be or to become the guy he is.
That's such an interesting note too, because I'm thinking now that, obviously our champions first and foremost are gameplay like elements. If the like the number one thing is that players have to want to play this champion in the game, otherwise that's not successful. Like if there's a single metric, I imagine it's that. Now, obviously, many of them have so many other good qualities as well. Like Teemo is a great example of just a guy who transcends everything, about our game and crosses the whole culture. But when we have characters like Renekton, is it being a good example just because of the badness? But I imagine this even with Azir and Xerath to an extent. They're so powerful that very power and kind of majesty about them can totally define them in terms of the character they are. It seems like backstory in that way, and particularly like old backstory of them being children, and in this case long ago, is such a good way to actually add some depth to the character.
Yeah, I mean, that was exactly the point of adding a lot of these things in, because, all these characters they don't just spring into being as the Nasus and Renekton, Azir and Xerath that we know of from game. Everything that they've experienced in their life has shaped them to be those characters.
Yeah.
We've talked about how, when when somebody ascends to become an ascended being, what is it that gives the shape to what they become when they're ascended? Why did Nasus become the jackal-headed guy? Why did Renekton become the crocodile guy? And there's all sorts of things that play into that procedure, and it's an imperfect procedure as well. So
no, but seriously, why do they get those?
Because he had a crocodile in his pocket and it was like the fly.
Clearly.
And Nasus just really liked dogs. But yeah, everything in their childhood, their mental makeup, and a whole bunch of mystical stuff from the ritual transforms them into something that best represents kind of who they are at that moment in time.
I think that was Renekton in particular was kind of a good indication of that for me. It's maybe a little less obvious with Jackal and Hawk and that kind of thing, but Crocodile's like, okay, I get the point here.
and just everything, all their backstory, which was interesting for all of us to dive into, and all these characters, as Ant says, it makes them far more rounded, makes them more believable as a character, that they would be who they are, behave how they are, and do the things that they do.
One of the things I really enjoyed in reading your stories was how two characters shape each other, especially two brothers with Nasus and Renekton, and then two people who are as close as Azir and Xerath, seeing how those relationships shape those characters, because that's something that you don't always get in a bio. So it was really great to have these two sets of pairs showing how they transform each other.
Oh, the interplay is so great. I mean, it's even those are some of the best examples, but just in general, there's so much interplay between all of these. It's such a good change, because that's, again, one of those tough things is when you're trying to tell that story of, this awesome character that you want to play and everything. It can be so about them. That's what I love about these story events, is we get more interesting stuff. And so as a segue, like, we obviously still got to talk about Azir and Xerath. There's one really interesting thing to me that happened in the Bloodline story, which is that Xerath beat the shit out of Nasus. And
a little bit.
Yeah, and that was really interesting to me, because I was like, wow, like, I wonder how I'd feel right now if Nasus is like my main and the character I love and everything, and in my story I'm seeing him getting humbled in this way. Now I know it seemed to me like it was heading in a direction of like, to some extent, like, he's broken, he doesn't have his brother, and he also needs to get his heart back in the fight, and he'll get there one day, and he'll come back and he'll give Xerath what for. But was that a decision at all of like, okay, all right, we're really going to double down on this? Because I feel like we haven't quite ever seen that in League story before.
That was the feelings you had reading that was exactly what I was going for. I wanted that.
Good
kind
job,
of,
Graham.
The Man of Steel vibe at the end with the two superheroes having a knockdown, drag out fight in the city, but without to an extent the horrible collateral damage of that fight, and playing up the fact that Nasus, he's not ready for this fight yet. He is still broken from his centuries wandering in the desert. He doesn't have his brother beside him, and even back in the day, at the height of their powers, they couldn't beat Zerath, not entirely, and Zerath has become even more powerful. So it's a level of, setting the stage for the future conflict to come, setting up the fact that, Nasus has a mission now. He has purpose now, and that's, these are threads that we will, tug on, hopefully at some other, later date.
And you're establishing Zerath as a proper threat as well.
He's a badass.
If straight up if Nasus was going toe to toe, he wouldn't seem like too threatening. It's like, well, this one guy can take him out. When the other guys get together and stuff, they'll take him down. But you go, he needs to be a big, powerful, scary guy.
Yeah, the hero never gets to defeat the bad guy straight out the bat. You've got to earn it, and at that point, Nasus has not earned it, and we don't know yet whether he ever will.
Yeah, and I mean, it's one of the many steps we are taking as we move towards a more fully fleshed out world. Like, there needs to be that kind of thing. It can't just be everyone in their own world of badassdom.
You can't tell stories where just everyone is awesome and gets to do awesome things, because there's no texture to it. It becomes boring if everybody's always kicking ass and winning all the time. You need to see the characters go through the ringer before you could properly enjoy their triumphs.
Yeah, for sure. So talking of ups and downs, so Azir and Zereth, that whole duality was that was awesome. Now all of this was again the how fleshed out this whole event was particularly great. But these guys are kind of the beacons around which it goes, like that love and hatred thing that they've got going on. Again, this was one of those stories that we had told before to an extent, but we further fleshed out this time, told more of the backstory as well as some of the newer stuff there. So what was guiding us in going through that, Ant?
Well, I mean, a lot of it was based off the earlier stuff that had been done. So a lot of the sort of story beats of what was going on with these guys was worked out, like as I said, a couple of years ago, but some of that hadn't yet been told.
Sure.
So a lot of it was, we were working back off that. So, and we'd also already done some of the story stuff for these guys as well as just in the event itself. But we'd already got a couple of the stories written. So like I'd done the Azir one previously. George Christic, another writer, had done the Zereth story. So we kind of knew we had some of that already, and we kind of knew where we wanted to take them. But there was still room to play and still room for new stuff to sort of emerge from that. But yeah, and I mean, part of the challenge with these ones was their stories were very, like, they overlapped so heavily.
Yeah.
But part of the challenge was to have each one's bio be its own distinct thing. So by the reading of the two of them, you get a much better picture of the whole lot. You could read one and it's specific to that side of the story.
Sure.
But you read them both together, and then you read the other bios all together as well, and you sort of start to get a much better picture of it all together.
Yeah.
Because a lot of the older stuff, certainly, and the original stuff rather, had a lot of these beats hinted at, and it was, they were definite touchstones for us to extrapolate out how a comment that Azir or Zereth makes in their original color text from a couple of years back, what led to that comment, what did that line there mean, what was Zereth referring to when he talks about this, and they were very, very useful roadmaps for us to figure out kind of how we arrived at point X, what led us to there, what story beats could we work back into from the original stuff.
I mean, the big thing that we haven't really gotten into is, we're going to talk about bloodlines. I'm forgetting two very important characters, obviously. So we've got Sivir and Talia. Now we've got all these godlike beings, and then we've got these now two very powerful but distinctly mortal women as well who are tied up in all of this. I know, especially when reading Bloodlines, it was kind of like it was a shift for me again to back it, like, okay, wow, we've been dealing with phenomenal cosmic power a ton, and then getting back to people that actually bleed, that kind of thing. How did we go about tying those really kind of disparate levels of power together?
Well, with a story like Bloodlines, where you are dealing with monstrously powerful, godlike beings, again, for that texture, you need to come down a level now and again partly to allow the reader time to breathe in terms of the action that's kicking off between Zerath and Nasus, and also to introduce the readers in, along with Ariel's bio and color text, to the character of Talia and Sivir in Shurima as itself. And it also, again, like we said, to see the mortals in this world of immortal godlike beings gives a nice contrast for how these people are regarded. And it was a great way for us to help support Talia, for one thing, and to see more of Sivir and establish her character in the Shuriman arc, because she's going to be a very important character going forward.
You don't say.
It's also to bring the human perspective, isn't it? So it's like seeing the events from like the human eye, and seeing all the stuff that's kicking off, and having like someone like Talia with her very human perspective of like she just wants to protect her family. It kind of puts everything else into perspective a little bit.
Yeah,
sure.
Human concerns, mortal concerns, where Nasus and Azir and Zerath are all concerned about 1,000-year-old grudges and power and consuming, guys, and conquering the world.
They're not up to the times like everyone else is.
Yeah.
One thing that was again helped flesh out my understanding and appreciation for the story as well is it also kept calling back to mind like, oh, Azir, you're a jerk too, man. It'd be really easy to be like, Azir, good guy, Zerath, bad guy, and that whole thing. And certainly on balance, it's probably closer to that than the alternative, but still, Azir's got some flaws, and particularly from the perspective of the ordinary person, maybe not everything he's cracked up to be.
He ruled over an empire of slaves.
Yeah.
Yes, he was secretly trying to end it, but he grew to adulthood for years, and it continued under him. And at the same time, you have to remember that Nasus and Renekton served an emperor in an empire of slaves. So that was the time in the empire they lived in. But we don't yet know quite how they perceived that. Did they, as godlike beings, did it not even concern them?
And that's what it seemed like. Because again, that's the complexity of it. It's like, man, you guys just didn't even care. And that's the thing. It's hard to blame Zerath. It really is. I went into the story fully prepared. All right, this guy's okay. All right, sorry. A lot of this. I'm not a sociopath, I swear. No, there are obviously a ton of terrible things there. He's the great threat. Definitely the evil. But again, a lifetime of grinding slavery, the likes of which is crazy to imagine at certain points. It started going into like literally he can't even think about freedom because the Ascended will peer into his mind and wipe him out. Like that was how he perceived all this. I can't
life
even
as a slave in Shurima, even under Azir's rule, trying to make it better, you're still a slave. You're still a thing, and you're something to be discarded when you're no longer useful. And the things Zerath as a child and adult to an extent went through can't have helped but shape him into a particular mindset. When you're regarded as property,
sure,
then you can't help but resent the people that are over you.
Yeah, and he had by far the best of it, basically. Like you
he
imagine,
didn't
like there seemed to be
bad.
some representative hatred as well, like on behalf of what was happening to the people he viewed as his and where he came from.
And his family. I mean, bad guys that are just bad guys all the time are pretty dull. And good guys that are good guys all the time are pretty dull as well. So
Sure.
it's nice to add a little bit more human element to them, add a little bit of grey to both sort of sides. To
the point, exactly, where you can look at Zerath and still go, man, you did some really terrible things.
Yeah.
But if you put yourself in his shoes, you can get into that maybe, hopefully, slightly uncomfortable position where you can go, yeah, but I can kind of see why you did it. And then you sort of go, whoa.
Yeah.
And if you can give that level of moral ambiguity to a character at some level before they do finally tip over that line into complete, utter evil, then you've achieved something.
Yeah. So the one thing I want to get back to to Bloodlines here and just kind of the specific execution we chose there. One thing that's I always try and remember, working here, right, is that we're in the modern age, baby. It's often an axiom here that people like videos, they like GIFs, they want to be in and out, people don't want to read and things like that. Now, that's anathema to me. I've been a huge reader my whole life. Love this stuff. Love us diving into things like Shadow and Fortune, right? Right?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, Shadow and Fortune and Bloodlines. And it does seem like those are essentially kind of like the most in-depth version of the stories that we're prepared to tell for the time being. Like there's not a book on the horizon or anything like that, the immediate horizon. Why though do we find the short story format to be an effective tool for us? Like bios, the easy answer is, well, even with the addition of color text and the pairing there, it's still basically similar to what we were doing back in the day, so it makes sense we would. But why short stories?
Because they're, for my money, they're the best bang for your buck for getting across a depth of story and characterization and world building. Because if you do it right, you can hit all of those bases in a story, and it's much easier to hook a reader into the empathy of the characters and the stakes of the story in that length of time. Because the short story, the one like Bloodline, was 8,000 words or so, which is much longer than most things that we put out, but I think it's a lot of that will come as like the more we do of it, the more people kind of get used to it, that this is the kind of things that we're doing, and that will gradually acclimatize them to that this is a great way of delivering lore to our players.
Yeah. I mean, and that's the fun thing working at Riot, I know, is we've got a lot of people working on a lot of different things. So it's not even a case of like, oh, why are you doing this, not doing this? Well, there's somebody working on that other thing too. It's just for the people that love this kind of thing as well, we can hopefully give them something they love. And I do love that what you mentioned about just that increased depth. You're right. It was positively packed, I noticed. The first thing I noticed is I was like, man, there's a lot of like nouns and terms here that I don't get, and I want to know more about them. When you were just describing daily life and like tools and things in the town, I guess the intent there is just hooks. Like,
well, yes, absolutely.
Sure.
It's a lot of the the devil's in the details. Stephen King is really good at this. He'll drop in like brands of things, tiny details of a thing that I might not know what that is, but it suggests a wider world. It suggests that there is more to this world than just the snapshot that I'm seeing. That there is things will go on. Once Nasus moves down the street, there is life still happening here. There's things still going on, that it feels like again, it's all about developing the stories into the reader's head, that this is a living, breathing world. That
and a different world,
yeah,
too.
It's not their world.
Yeah.
Absolutely. That things don't happen in isolation, that the actions have consequences, story events happen, and that will have repercussions further down the line. Yeah. And those little details just really help add the feeling that this has got grit to it and a reality to it. Because the best fantasy, to my way of thinking, is the one that has a real solid foundation in a level of believability and reality. Because if you can believe that this world could function, even with godlike beings running around and magic in the air, then you've sold the audience on it, and they're engaged, they're hooked.
Yeah, that can be, and that I imagine is going to be a continuing challenge, because there, at points I'm sitting there, I'm like, man, this guy just, giant dog man, god of an elder age, just walked up to him. That's got to be awful.
It's got to be unusual.
Yeah, sure.
Inspiring.
They probably have a little bit more of a tolerance for weird stuff on Runeterra.
Yeah, in a world where magic does exist, even if it's utterly uncommon, and it's not, a person could go their whole life and not see it.
Sure.
They're probably more conditioned to the idea that seeing a giant dog-headed man might be, yeah, okay, I could believe that.
It's like people are like, myths there aren't just like 100% myth and we all know it's fake. It's almost like myths in Runeterra are, we know there's substance, we just haven't seen it in a while.
Exactly. I know the dragons are real, I just haven't seen one yet.
Yeah, exactly. So what about the brutality? That was so interesting to me. Like, obviously League is, the setting is a violent game. The champions are killing each other all the time and everything, so we'd expect that. And then even within the stories, again, there's killing going on and stuff like that. I'm talking like the bios and the flavor pieces. But again, it's kind of centered around like, okay, we got to show this guy being awesome. Well, he's probably going to kill some guys, that kind of thing. With Bloodlines, again, I was almost struck by the casual brutality of the setting in terms of, well, there's just an attack going on and there's just normal people just getting obliterated in their houses, and Zareth is driving hundreds of dudes forward and with zero regard. And again, it's not like this was some rated R setting or anything like that, but
No.
it just, again, it was a different step than I'm used to seeing.
I mean, again, as we've said earlier, it was partly to show just how bad Zerath is, that
Sure.
he will do these things just to get all this to get one person. And the worst, so to speak, of the violence in that story was between two ascended beings, them knocking the crap out of one another. The rest of it was hopefully presented as it was terrible.
Sure.
It was very bad, all these things happening, and that's what Nasus is there to try and stop. This is a bad thing that's happening, and I am trying to stop it. And again, the level of its description was, hopefully in keeping with the setting, that it wasn't pitched deliberately to be gratuitous or over the top.
I think a lot more of it's sort of that implied
exactly,
horror of
and
what
we always try and err on the side of caution when it comes to things like that, because a lot of different regions have different sensitivities to how these things are portrayed. So a lot of what you think you're seeing, you're not seeing, or it's implied that it's happening, or it's told in a vague enough way that you can fill in the blanks yourself. It's like in Reservoir Dogs, there's the bit where Mr. Blonde goes to town on the cop.
Yeah.
And the bit you think you see in that movie that everyone's, the bit where he does this, you never actually see in the movie. You always fill it in the blanks yourself. You think, oh yeah, that you never actually see that bit happen in the film.
That's a good point.
But everyone thinks they saw it, but it didn't.
Sure. And
a lot of the violence in the story is handled in hopefully much the same way. And even at the end, without spoiling, the ending to those who haven't read it yet, it's not all, doom and gloom for the characters, because, Talia's there to
that seems
try
very
and
intentional.
alleviate that.
A note of hope.
Very much so. Very much so.
And like you said, just to support it, you need your bad guys to do bad things to understand the level of threat that they are and why they need to be stopped and why your heroes need to step up to the plate.
Yeah, because let's say to talk to your earlier point, I think, Nasus does not get the best of this encounter, but nor does he totally disgrace himself. He holds his own and he survives. He gives as good as he gets in a lot of ways. So yes, let's say the villains need to vil and the heroes need to hero.
Good stuff. Well, you raised a good point. I hope we didn't spoilerify things too much. I got to imagine most people who are listening to this have probably gone out and already done it, but it's definitely a good point. So we're always learning more through doing these, and then there's going to be more story down the line. And I imagine you guys, I know you guys are already working on what's to come next. Now, we can't obviously talk spoilers or what exactly is coming up next or anything, but I am curious just what was learned in this case. What are we looking to apply in the future? What do we want to do more of that we couldn't quite do? Like, how are we going to get better, essentially? So what's next? Rayla, let's hear from you. It's been a while.
Sure. I guess what I learned from this is it's good to have a variety of different voices.
Sure.
And in addition to having kind of the core champions that you think of when you immediately think of a faction, I like handling kind of the tertiary champions that maybe don't necessarily have an effect on the story now, but who knows when they'll come rolling in later. It's not a spoiler.
I mean, it's right though. Like, there's obviously badass immediately comes to mind, and epic. I think particularly in a lot of the Shurima story, just because of the nature of the conflict we're dealing with. But League is still a champion, or League is still a game of the Brahms and the Ramesses and the Luxes and those really fun loving characters, and we want to honor that as well. Like, this world is more complex than just epic all the time, And those characters are even awesome and epic in their own way. So I definitely, I appreciated that flavor to this. Like, Ramus was some much needed levity after sitting there like, dang, these guys hate each other.
Yeah, absolutely. And it wouldn't have felt right to have a grim, dark story about Ramus. Like, he's kind of a character that people like to laugh with.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
And likewise, it might not have been right to lead the event opening with that story. It came out in the right sort of time
exactly.
to balance things out.
It doesn't really have an effect on Bloodline.
So is staggered rollout
that we know of yet.
Is staggered rollout something that happens just by the nature of the process, or is that what we can expect more of in the future?
I think we're just experimenting, really.
Okay.
Like seeing, and we'd like to hear what players like.
Yeah.
Like,
Do you think it worked in this case?
I think so. Yeah, it seemed to have people keep coming back and actually engaging with more of them. It seemed to be an easier way to consume it than just one huge big dump.
It's easier to digest when you can keep coming back every now and again to get, bite-sized chunks as opposed to a gigantic lore dump.
If we just drop a novel, you're right to your point of like spoilers, probably couldn't even do this podcast for a while after, because we need to obviously
give people time to read
digest and everything. And we do want to keep it accessible. Again, like just because people aren't like huge book readers doesn't mean we wouldn't want them to be able to experience this backstory for their story or for their champs. So that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think sprinkling them as well gives us a chance to release them as we're writing them, rather than if we wanted to release every single one in one big go, you go, well, we wouldn't be releasing anything for quite some time, because it's going to take a while to do that.
Gotcha.
So I think doing them as we go.
And it helps put the focus on different champions too.
Yeah.
Like I know when I log into League, like I want to hear about my particular favorite champions. Those are the ones I'd be most interested in. So it's a chance to put the spotlight on those favorites.
Gotcha.
And it allowed us to vary the tone every now and again. When you've had a bunch of grim, falling outs between champions, sacrifice, and so on. It's nice to get to drop in with some human characters, with some levity, with Rammus and so on. Some much more mythical, folktale type characters, and it keeps things varied, because one note tones get boring very quickly.
Yeah, well, and everybody's looking. It's easy enough to write a book series and you're aiming at a particular audience, But this game has so many people all around the world. We do want to make sure that we're being inclusive on that. One thing I'm curious on that note, like obviously we seem to have the idea of like we'll hit a region and we'll hit the champions associated with that region. There are a good chunk of particularly some older champions in League who aren't associated really strongly with particular regions. Do we have any thinking around how we want to attack those characters and giving them some of the same love?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I don't think the way that we've done them recently isn't necessarily the way we have to always do them.
Sure.
I think there's lots of different ways that we could release new bios. Like we could, if we just did a new story that happens to have a bunch of champions in it, that would be a good time to do those bios. So I think there's all sorts of different ways, and I think we'll play around with more of that in the future as well.
Cool. On that note, it obviously seems effective, or I guess like I want to say like cost effective, not in those strict terms, but just like an effective use of the words and our effort and our time to have champions kind of engaged in a similar storyline together for these purposes. Is there more to that? Like, do we think that's the best expression of League story when you've got kind of six or more like involved in an embroiled conflict? Or
it gets to a point where you don't want too many champs together, because then you get that small world syndrome where it's like it feels like they're always bumping into one another on the street kind of thing. But yeah, having a few of them together has an economy to it where you can tell a bunch of different stories about different champs located in the one narrative. But yeah, beyond a certain number, it becomes a bit unwieldy, becomes a bit unlikely that they would all cross paths quite so frequently.
Sure. I think it was indicative in Bloodlines that, I was sitting there, I was like, when's Renekton going to show up? And then he didn't, I imagine, again, like you said, that's a deliberate choice.
Yeah, because that's a story I think that would merit its own story.
Yeah.
This is very much Nasus and Zerath's story. Mm-hmm. And they were for want of a better term, they were the A story in this one. Sivir and Talia gave, some lightness of touch to the story and gave us a moment to come away from these godlike beings.
Sure.
And I think it's also building up some of those characters that people understand them enough before you can start to put them together in the big ensemble kind of pieces. Mm-hmm. Like if you think of like comics, you go, it's much harder. It'll be harder to understand straight into like the huge big ensemble pieces with multiple characters.
Okay.
And until you've already done those individual films or individual comics, so you get to know who that character is, so that when you put them in the huge piece, it's not necessarily all about them, but you understand who they are and their part in it. And when they do have their little moments, really cool. But it's like you only kind of get that because they've already set it up. So I think that's a lot of what we're doing at the moment through the bios is really sort of setting up our characters for future storytelling.
Gotcha. Any other learnings, musings, thoughts going forward?
Nothing.
No is okay.
Nothing
at all. I think having that range,
course, yes.
like Rayla was saying, like having a good range is really good. Yeah. It's something we're always conscious of, but it's also sometimes easy to forget in the middle of things. So we've got such a wide range of characters, and that's part of the strength of League. Mm-hmm. It's like that wide range of characters, also a wide range of tones. But yeah, I mean, I think even showing similar characters in different tones would be really interesting as well.
Sure. And I imagine that precise mix is going to vary a ton based on what factions and regions you're dealing with and the characters involved. Like, I can imagine a Freljord story, for instance, or a story beat that is relatively similar in terms of like the complexities, the multiple lines of conflict, like the epic characters and all of that. But some of the other settings might be more suited to smaller, more quiet. Like, again, it's like you said, experimental.
Yeah, it depends on the story, right?
Exactly.
It depends on like what kind of tone you're going for in that particular story that you're writing.
And I think that's a really important thing, because it's like it should be story led. So it's like the type of stories that people are excited about writing are always going to be the best stories.
Mm-hmm.
If someone's excited about what they're writing, it's going to come across. So it's like sometimes we don't want to get too sort of too stuck on the process of going, well, no, we have to hit this region next. It's like, well, actually, if someone's got a really cool story that they want to explore, you go, that's a very valid reason to explore that area of the world or those set of characters.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and not every story has to be, blood and thunder, cosmic beings, world-shaking events. They can, a lot of these stories could and should be smaller, more intimate kind of dramas.
Yeah, Bird in the Branch felt that way.
Exactly.
It's a nice change. Felt relaxing. Want to hang out and have some tea with Yasuo.
But still
Not for
really
long,
important. Like, still a really great way of exploring the world and exploring these characters and the things that really matter to them.
Yeah, it's that depth. It's not just, oh man, I zap around yelling a lot and slicing dudes up. I'm contemplative.
That said, I do really want to see the Nasus Renekton showdown.
Oh man,
Very excited.
I really badly just want the first time Azir and Zara see each other again. Just that little
man.
like the pithy
The eye
lines there it's
contact.
gonna drop on him and just like Graham, I imagine, will probably have duty on that again. Just the description of the hatred. That's really just what's
That'd
getting me
be
going. I love the depth
Just
of that
WWE
hatred.
trash talk before they get into it.
Cool. All right. Well, I think that's a good note for us to wrap up on. Listeners out there, want to thank you for tuning on in these. We're definitely gonna have you folks back. I'm loving doing these story check-ins, and so listeners, you can probably expect something else like this around the next obvious time when we're further fleshing out the universe. So until then, check out other stuff in the League series. We just kicked off with the gameplay team, the kind of like a re-envisioned patch rundown that we're doing in lower scope form through podcast. Other than that, just give us feedback. Let us know what you liked, what you didn't, and we will see you next time. Take care.